If this journey through the story the cinema didn't tell has made you see heroism in a deeper and more real way, then this is your place. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because the most important stories are the ones that challenge us to understand the complexity of the human soul. But for Kyle, that rejection wasn't a barrier. It was the fuel that forged his unshakable determination. That period of uncertainty, working on an isolated ranch, didn't weaken him. On the contrary, it hardened him. He didn't know it yet, but that initial no was the first step in forging a warrior who, years later, would carry a burden far heavier on his shoulders than any bull, the weight of being a legend on the battlefield. Part 4. The stories and the scars, the controversies. And this was not an isolated incident. Other extraordinary claims, such as shooting looters in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, also found no evidence in the real world. This creates an uncomfortable paradox that the film avoids. The man whose precision on the battlefield was a matter of life and death seemed to have a somewhat distorted aim when it came to telling his own story in civilian life. The movie showed you the warrior with a perfect aim, but it didn't show you the cowboy who was rejected by the Navy before becoming a hero. It didn't show you the man who, far from the battlefield, suffered from crushing panic attacks. And most of all, it didn't dare to explore the storyteller whose own legend sometimes strayed from reality. In the movie, we see a confident hero, almost a precision machine, but the reality of war was far more complex. The nickname, the legend, wasn't born just from his marksmanship, but from the gratitude of the Marines on the ground. To them, Carl was an invisible guardian angel, the watchful eye on a rooftop who ensured they would return home. And this title, born from respect, slowly began to transform into a heavy chain of impossible expectations. So, the question the movie doesn't dare to ask is, why would a decorated hero feel the need to create these stories? Perhaps the answer lies not in malice, but in pain. Perhaps the war leaves wounds so deep that reality becomes unbearable, and the creation of a personal mythology becomes the last, desperate survival mechanism for a warrior's soul that can no longer live in the ordinary world. In this video, we are going to fill in those exact blanks. To truly understand a hero, you must know their scars, not just their medals. Get ready to learn the real story of Chris Kyle, with all his glory, all his pain, and all his contradictions. What you will discover here is what the movie didn't have the courage to show. Being the legend means you are not allowed to fail. Every soldier who fell under his watch wasn't a statistic of war, but a personal failure, a stain on his self-imposed honor. It's like a renowned surgeon who, despite saving 1,000 lives, can only remember the one he lost on the table. The weight of perfection is a burden that no human being can carry for long without starting to crack. The real story of Chris Kyle doesn't give us a perfect hero, but something far more valuable. A complete human being. It teaches us that the hardest battles aren't fought against enemies we can see, but against the ghosts we carry inside us. Honoring the legend is easy. Understanding the man, with all his scars and contradictions, is the real challenge and the real lesson. Part 1. The Rejected Cowboy, the Origin of the Legend. It was in this void that a new dream emerged, to become a Navy SEAL. But life seemed to have other plans. Imagine your greatest dream, your second chance, slamming the door in your face. For most people, that no from the Navy, because of the pins in his wrist, would have been the end of the line. It would be the definitive proof that it just wasn't meant to be. The moment to accept a more common destiny and move on, head held low. This internal war, fought in the silence of his home, took a heavy toll on his family. How do you truly connect with your wife and children when a part of you is still on a rooftop in Iraq, protecting your brothers in arms? This conflict between the hero he was over there and the man he struggled to be at home might explain a great deal. Perhaps, to survive the peace, he felt the need to rewrite his own legend, even if it meant straying a bit from the facts. Before he was a legend, Chris Kyle was just a Texas cowboy with a dream made of dust, sweat, and the 8-second glory of riding a bull. His life was simple, ruled by the rhythm of the ranch and the raw adrenaline of the rodeo. It was a world where courage was measured by how tightly you could hold on. But that life came to a sudden and violent end. A horse rolled over on him, and along with his ribs, it also broke his future, leaving him adrift and with metal pins in his wrists. The book American Sniper turned Chris Kyle from a war hero into a cultural icon. But this is where the story the movie doesn't tell becomes even murkier and painfully human. Mixed in with the accounts of undeniable bravery, there were stories that were later proven not to correspond with reality. The most famous case was the lawsuit filed by Jesse Ventura, which the court concluded was a story Kyle fabricated to promote himself. Part 2. The Weight of a Legend, the Battle in Iraq. And the armor finally cracked, not amidst gunfire in Iraq, but in the solemn silence of the funeral for his friend and fellow SEAL, Michael Mansour. There, the legend suffered a panic attack so severe he was unable to move, crushed by a sense of guilt and a responsibility he was never meant to carry alone. That was the first clear sign that even if Chris Kyle could leave Iraq, the war had already found a new battlefield, his own mind. Now I ask you, what do you do with your own silent battles? Do you hide them behind a personal legend? Or do you have the courage to face them head on? Kyle's story proves that, even for the strongest of warriors, the most important war is the one fought for one's own inner peace. Are you fighting that war? Part 3. The war that never ends, the battle at home. The mind of an elite soldier is like a high-performance software running on a computer. It was programmed to detect threats, calculate risks, and respond with lethal force in milliseconds. The problem is, when he comes home, no one gives him the manual on how to shut down the program. The war kept running in the background, 24/7, consuming the RAM of his peace and his ability to connect with the reality around him. For the civilian, the war is over when the soldier steps foot at home. But for the soldier, that is often where the loneliest battle begins. The movie scratches the surface of this struggle, but the reality was much deeper. The same instincts that kept Chris Kyle alive in Iraq became his enemies at home. The backfire of a car wasn't just a noise, it was a gunshot. A crowd at the mall wasn't a crowd, it was a potential ambush. His brain was still patrolling the streets of Ramadi. If this journey through the story the cinema didn't tell has made you see heroism in a deeper and more real way, then this is your place. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because the most important stories are the ones that challenge us to understand the complexity of the human soul.